Welcome to my budget deck channel where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible. So if this is something you'd be interested in, then why not subscribe? And it seems to be Krawler weeks at McDonald's. I swear this is the last Krawler deck that I'm going to be doing for a while, I hope, because I felt like I have done, like, this is the third one if I'm not mistaken, but this one is a doozy. It's not necessarily like super strong, but it combines two of my favorite archetypes. It kind of focuses around the flip playstyle a little bit, and that's why it was dear to my heart to actually show this deck off. It's going to be mainly like a deck to play in like low gold if you want to be doing some fun stuff. If you have Soma anyway for some crazy combos, if you like Shaddolls, if you have invested in them at one point anyway, then this deck is yours for the taking. It's not like absolutely awful, but it struggles for a lot of reasons, but I'll be getting into that more in the rating section. Let's do the card by card first. We run quite the lineup of crawlers. There's a reason for that. We run one of each of those ones. Technically you could go for like Ranveer instead of Glial and so on and so on. There's obviously different kind of ones that you can be using. I decided to go for that many because in theory, you have a bit of an issue from time to time in this deck, because technically if you run Soma, you actually want to have a decent amount of normal summonable monsters, and this deck has, I think 16 it is, if we don't count the possibility of milling some off of World Legacy Survivor, which if you run stuff like Small World, then you want to have at least two monsters in your hand, one that you then can search Soma with, and obviously you need another monster to use the Soma effect. So I felt like 16 felt like the sweet spot in testing when I did test hands and whatnot, so I could pull off the Soma effect the most consistently if I actually drew into Soma or searched Soma, because otherwise what's the point in running a powerful card like it? You can technically cut one or two cards and hope that it works, and sometimes just basically instantly surrender instead of doing nothing. The whole thing is, yeah, I felt like it worked out the best for me in this specific way, but stuff like Glial you don't necessarily need actually. When it comes to Small World, name a more iconic duo than Krawler Soma and Small World, besides probably me and Tindangle if I'm being honest. This card is a flip monster, funny enough. It's a very, 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 very old card, so some of you might be happy to see this being back around. Technically, you could also be playing Mathematician. It helps a bit more with stuff like the Shaddoll plays, but it's an ultra rare and I did not want to go down that route because this deck is already with Soma and the Shaddoll stuff quite expensive, sadly. So this is one of the Small World bridges actually. It gets most crawlers into the Soma engine, which is quite nice because this card is level 3. It's Earth though, Earth Spellcaster. The only thing I think it doesn't work with is Receptor, because Receptor has 1200 defense and so does this card, so yikes, but we still have a second card that works with Receptor, so it's not that much of a problem. Guard also works with most Shaddolls into Soma because it's a spellcaster and none of the other stuff works. Obviously Hedgehog you can do because Hedgehog has not only 800 attack but is also level 3, so this is a bit of an iffy one, but the other ones, just for a quick look through, work quite well with the attacks. Actually even Wendi works because Wendi is level 3, so Wendi works with this one without being a spellcaster because the level 3 kind of thing, and the stats also check out, just to make sure this all works. And technically you can use this card to go from crawlers into Shaddoll and the other way around, which is quite fun because you can actually search Wendi with it. And searching Wendi sounds maybe not the most necessary a lot of the time, but if you have Wendi and Soma in hand, this is where the fun begins. This is how you can pull off your biggest combo, although it's not as big in a budget deck because you kind of do need stuff like Appaloosa for it, but I'll be talking about this in a second. So you can see this card itself already gets you into a lot of stuff. While we're at the whole Small World bridges, let's talk about Mothman as well. You can get Krawler into Soma, as we already noticed in other deck profiles, and technically this card is also a way to get Shaddoll Hedgehog and Shaddoll Beast into Soma, which isn't too bad either. The thing is, yeah, I do run this card, like I split it up like this because this one has then some other kind of options because some of them wouldn't work with each other. Also, Mothman has the effect of discarding stuff, so that's quite nice. That can help you from time to time, so I felt like it wasn't too bad running on Mothman. Also, it's a dark for going into Winda, so do not underestimate this. Sometimes this might be handy as well. Sadly, this effect doesn't trigger the second effect when it's used for as a fusion material for fusion summon, then it doesn't trigger, but it is what it is. one Hedgehog. I kind of wanted to play two just to mill them off of World Legacy Survivor, and then ending up with one normal summonable Shaddoll monster in my hand for some reason, mainly Wendi, but the space was quite crammy, and I did want to go more for the Krawler playstyle. I tried a variant that was more Shaddoll focused, running Polymerization, running Lunarlight Black Sheep, and trying to get the fusion thing going, but my turns usually ended in either also a bricky hand or in Winda Pass. And Winda Pass can be strong, don't get me wrong, but first of all, it's not very interesting or fun to play, and second of all, yeah, you would be surprised how many times your opponent can actually get around Winda Pass these days. It's not as strong anymore, but if you are more into this, then there is a version in here. If you cut some of the small crawlers, if you cut some of the crawler package and replace it with polys and black sheep and so on and so on and so on, then you can actually find a version in here that also consistently does Winda Pass, but technically it's not like, then you don't need the crawler package at all. You might just play pure Shaddoll and just jam in lots of fusion cards anyway. One Ash Blossom, first of all, funny enough, this card with Small World can also get you into some stuff because of the whole level 3 thing, and the stats don't collide with Mysterious Guard, so you can actually get into Soma by using Ash Blossom, which is a bit hilarious in my opinion. Not that matters, but you basically get this card for free, and this deck needs some stuff that actually does things going second. I felt like Ash Blossom, out of the free cards that you get from the bundles, is still the best one, so I wanted to include at least one of them, and it at least does stuff over impermanence with Small World, so it can act as a combo piece, I want to say. Triple Wendi, you can technically cut this card down to 2 because like I saw, there is lots of stuff you can actually do to get into Wendi, so technically 2 Hedgehog and 2 Wendi would also work if you want to shave down on the budget a little bit. It's not terrible, but I like having this in my starting hand. And the thing is, once you use World Legacy Survivor to like dump stuff like Hedgehog and that searches you Wendi loses lots of its power, because then you cannot fusion summon for the rest of the turn, and this is kind of what we want to be doing, fusion summoning. So Wendi is, in my opinion, a 3-off in this specific deck because the combo with Soma is just too good. It gets lots of stuff going. It technically can also get you into a Link 4, which I'll be talking about when I hit Soma. Shaddoll Squamata, very, very fun card in this specific deck, because not only can it send stuff like Hedgehog to the graveyard, which then adds you Wendi, it can send Wendi to the graveyard, so you get one monster on board, but what it can also do, if this card is milled off of World Legacy Survivor, you can then use the effect of Squamata to send to the graveyard Reeshaddoll Incarnation, and then you have another flip activation during your opponent's turn. It sounds very underwhelming, but in a flip deck, having a card that actually during your opponent's turn flips up your monsters besides World Legacy pawns is very, very hilarious, and all that you need to do for this is actually send Squamata to the graveyard. So there's that. Usually if you go into the whole Wendi plus Soma combo, you will be using this to send it to the graveyard anyway, but then you won't use it during your opponent's turn, but during your turn, and so on and so on and so on. There's lots you can do with this. Dragon, nice being sent to the graveyard because it's back row removal, and also technically it's on board, it's not a terrible disruption. The 0 defense is a bit iffy from time to time, but 1,900 attack points can get you over certain things. It's probably the heaviest hitter in this deck in your normal summons, so there's that. And also, yeah, the effect to be able to bounce one thing, it's good, but it's still target, so we still have that issue from time to time. Already talked about Mothman, can be very great, but watch out when you use it. Obviously, if you have it in hand with Soma, very risky that you discard Soma, then you kind of don't know what to do. But sometimes just normal summoning a discard, flipping it over Soma isn't terrible either. Shaddoll Beast, very nice, can be your massive draw engine, can also be your card to get World Legacy's Mind Meld from your hand into the graveyard. But since we can only semi-consistently pull this off, is one of the reasons why I decided to not go with 3 copies. If you want to run 3, you can. It can be very strong because obviously Deus X-Krawler lock is one of the big plays, but it's so conditional. Like, you do need Krawler Soma, and then you do need a way of getting this into the graveyard, and so on and so on and so on. You don't have it as consistently as in the Sprite version, for example, so I felt like 2, yeah, works, even though you do play more Krawler, so technically you get away with 3 sometimes, but if you draw 2 of this and some Shaddoll stuff, your hand is even more bricky than usual. So, Soma, the combo that I was talking about is, if you have Wendi, normal summon Wendi, flip Wendi face down. Then activate the effect of this card, summon 2 of your crawlers, doesn't really matter which ones. Usually you want to go for the ones that don't really matter all that much because you're going to be summoning them face up. Then we go into Shaddoll Construct to flip monsters. Very, very important here, because this card can then fuse with Wendi. Wendi would then set from the deck Hedgehog, we fuse into Shaddoll Construct. Construct then sends to the graveyard Squamata. Squamata sends to the graveyard Incarnation. Incarnation can then flip up if you use the effect, banishing Squamata or whatever card you want. Technically, you could also banish Wendi. Depends on what card you want to be going into during opponent's turn. If it's Winda or if it is actually Apkallone, then you kind of have to work around this if you don't want to be banishing your Construct, because sometimes this card can come in handy, and since we only run one, you have to play around this a bit. So what we have now, flip over Hedgehog, search Shaddoll Schism to your hand, then discard Schism, summon back Construct from the graveyard, then you can go into a Link 3 or into a Link 4. If you have a good one like Appaloosa, for example, you can go into that one, then send Construct as a link material to the graveyard. Construct second effect activates, and with Construct second effect, you can then add Shaddoll Schism back to your hand, and so you have a Link 4 that does stuff on your board, or technically Link 3 like Decode Talker if you want to protect things and whatnots, or if you have other stuff in the graveyard, you can also combine this with Lib and so on and so on and so on. Important is that you send this to the graveyard, because then for the next turn you have Schism on your board as well, which can then go into Apkallone or can go into Winda, depending on what your graveyard setup looks like. Obviously, you kind of want Hedgehog in the graveyard then as well, because Hedgehog is the dark monster in that regard, because technically Winda, for example, is a Construct, for example, isn't. So you just have to watch out what you want to be going into, but this card then can be very strong. There is a combo running Ariel, I think, the one that banishes stuff from the graveyard, where you then can activate Shaddoll Construct's effect twice, because this card effect isn't once per turn, so that's quite fun, because you can then summon it back if you summon Ariel out of the extra deck, out of your deck with the effect of Wendi, and so on. Then you can do this, but I didn't really feel like I found a space for Ariel, although it can be nice, especially moving stuff from the graveyard against things like Tier Elements or the Ishizu cards. Very, very nice. Yeah, I didn't find really a good space for it. Technically, you could cut like one Squamata if you want. You can completely not play Beast if you like. The draw engine isn't amazing. It didn't really come up as much as I wanted to, and if this card's in your hand, then you can't really do much with it. So technically, there's a case to be made to drop Beast. But yeah, that is up to you. So this is the combo I was talking about, but obviously you can do loads of stuff with these two cards as much as you like. We run one Deus X-Krawler, because if you have this card in your graveyard, sometimes even when your opponent goes into stuff like Decode Talker or any link monster that points towards you as well, which doesn't happen like too little, sometimes that does happen, then you can still activate the effect of this card in your graveyard, then summon this, and usually if you have this card in graveyard, you can go into Lib, then search as your legacy pawns, then you banish this one, summon this one, and then during opponent's turn you can flip that up and use somewhat skill drain your opponent, which is somewhat funny for them, not so much. World Legacy Survivor, very nice card with Shaddolls. That's why I kind of wanted to focus more on the Krawler part of the deck, because if this card mills certain Shaddolls, this is very strong because you get extra monsters on board, and since we play in a flip deck, it's quite fun. If you have like a full board, it works quite well with Needle Sealing, it works quite well with World Legacy and Shadow if you have more stuff on board, because if you mill any of Wendi or Squamata, you can send Wendi then. Wendi's effect gets you another body on board, can also be another draw, technically can also be a spell trap pop, but you mainly want to go first, so it's not too important. And Hedgehog can add your card to your hand if you don't have any normal summonable monsters and you mill one of the Squamatas and one of the spell trap World Legacy cards, then you still have some from the Soma, and obviously this card can also get you into Soma, but for the rest of this turn after this card resolves, so that's very important, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck except link monsters. Bit of a drawback, but usually you can maneuver around it. Sometimes you can, but then you just have to make do with like set pass 3 set face down monsters and possibly one of the World Legacy cards to support that. Small World, very, very interesting card, and you already talked about it plenty. World Legacy and Shadow, very strong card because of the second effect. The first effect can come in handy because sometimes if you have one of your Krawlers and one of your Shaddolls and another Shaddoll in hand, you can then go into Construct with the effect of this one. Well, by the way, very important, Shaddoll Construct, Shaddoll Construct. If you play in real life paper Yu-Gi-Oh, then you have to actually keep that one in mind. I think one person doing a tournament didn't, and then was forced to play with this card instead of this one. doesn't happen really Master Duel, but keep that one in mind. So World Legacy Shadows can be nice, and obviously the second effect, when you flip monsters destroyed by battle with an opponent's monster, you can send that opponent's monster to the graveyard, which isn't once per turn, non-destruction, non-targeting removal, very, very important, because other than that, you don't have much of that. You can't really get rid of your opponent's monsters that can't be destroyed or targeted, so this one very, very important for the deck. Technically, you could run out of 3, you could cut certain cards if you want to, but I feel like the 2 ratios actually work out in combination with Survivor and with things like Lib. I felt like the 2 offs are a bit better than certain 3 offs because you kind of break enough as it is. Needle Sealing, very important, because not only with Soma you can get actually lots of face downs on your board, but also with the Shaddoll package and things like World Legacy Survivor. So Needle Sealing, very strong card, but you can run whatever you want. Still, it doesn't nuke your own monsters if they face down, so you can actually decimate your opponent's board quite well with this one. Lost Wind, very, very good, especially if it's milled off of Survivor. You don't lose out on it, you still get 1 negate, technically not doing the next turn, but at least doing your turn then, so it at least does stuff, or your opponent focuses the energy on clearing the Lost Wind, because it can be really, really annoying. So this is why I decided to go for this, but also this is up for debate. To Mind Meld, because I did want to play through it 3, I really did, but the hands that I had where you just have Shaddoll monsters and 2 of this, it's terrifying, it's annoying, so I want to keep this as small as possible. I don't want to run Foolish Burial Goods or something like this either, because I can't really get into link monsters too consistently with this deck either, so I felt like 2 is quite fine. Sometimes you mill it off of this, sometimes you have either the effect of Apkallone or the effect of Mothman to get this one to the graveyard can help you. Sometimes you can actually use the effect and then use the other effect during your next turn, and so on and so on and so on. So it's not terrible. Sometimes you just want to normal summon or special summon one Krawler and face up and hope your opponent doesn't make the connection or forgets that this card exists, and it's just like, oh, why would they do this? Was it a misclick? Whatever. And then you can actually float into stuff. Got Ash Blossomed quite a lot with this though, funny enough, when it came up, so a bit annoying. This card can be a blessing and a curse. It's very nice if you already have a setup and this card is either in your graveyard, or if you have it in hand, you can summon a flip monster back. Well, not the Shaddoll flip monster, then this card can be very strong, can generate you a lot of advantage. Still a bit annoyed you can't use both effects during the same turn, a bit unnecessary to put this on a card like that, but it is what it is. It can be super bricky in your hand though, since your lineup of Shaddoll monsters isn't amazingly big, so technically sometimes you will be having this as a dead card in your hand, but also you don't want to put more cards into your deck, because then you will see Soma less often, and Soma is one of the key pieces, and so on and so on. You get me? It's a bit iffy sometimes if you mix 2 engines together. World Legacy Pawns, very, very nice, also works with the Shadolls. Could play this at 3, but it's the same reason as with the other ones. I felt like 2 was kind of the sweet spot. Mainly you'll be surging it with Lib, but sometimes you hit it off Survivor, and then it's quite nice. So you have kind of like, I want to say 4 copies of this card in your deck, because a lot of the time you'll be flipping it over with a Survivor, but a lot of the time you also won't. Schism already talked about, very, very nice card, can do lots of things. Don't forget though, you cannot attack directly with the monsters that you summon, and obviously you can send one monster to your opponent control to the graveyard with the same attribute of the fusion summoned card, which is very important if you go into Winda and Apkallone, because they're dark and there's lots of dark stuff around. Other than that, you will not be using it to go into Construct, and I guess there are wind decks sometimes, question mark. It is what it is. Talking about the extra deck, we do have to definitely 100% run 1 Winda and 1 Construct. You technically don't have to run Apkallone, but first of all, this card very good going second, and it's still a good disruption because it negates effects and it cannot be destroyed by battle, so this can come in handy. I really would recommend playing this card. You can try it out beforehand if you don't want to be running it, but it can be nice. Technically with it and Soma you can go into rank 6s, but I did not want to include that one. Winda, don't have to say much for it, cannot be destroyed by opponent's card effects, and obviously shuts down special summoning plays to an extent. 1 Wendigo, because we run triple Wendis, and you kind of sometimes need a card that then you can send to the graveyard to like maybe get Schism back. It's not that crazy. I used to run it because I used to run 1 Shaddoll Fusion, because you can send that to the graveyard with certain effects, or sometimes get milled by Survivor, and then you can keep using this card to gain resources if your opponent's playing an extra based deck. So if you want to, you can put one of these in here, maybe cut one of the Lost Winds and whatnots, I felt like it wasn't necessary and wasn't really on the budget way of things, but you could try that one out. So this card is basically in here to stall and have one more card left that you can use as a link material, whatever, if so your Schism isn't completely useless in the later stages of the grind game. Apkallone, very good card. Construct, very, very, very important card. Does very much for your deck. Herald of Pure Light to actually recycle your fusion monsters with your Shaddoll monsters, because having 2 level 2s on board isn't actually too hard with running stuff like Soma and running the effects of the Krawler monsters, so not too bad. Cat Shock, because sometimes you need to be able to beat over certain things, and you can actually make your monster quite pump it up quite a lot, so it's not a terrible card in here, but you can cut it. Crumble Logos against certain cards, especially Runic, this card can be quite nice. This one helps you beating over certain stuff and negating effects. It's not mandatory to run any of those, but they do stuff. 1x Krawler, doesn't matter which one really, could run any at this point. You can go for this one as well, or go for this one. Usually if you're going into them, you'll be going into them with the stuff you summon off of Soma and Soma itself. This card, very, very nice for the effect of floating. Already though, since you can't use it with Mind Meld, it's not as good as it used to be. It is what it is. We still can be going into this. It kind of protects you from stuff like Raigeki, because otherwise your board is pretty open to power cards like Raigeki, because you don't have a negate, because this is just a monster negate, sadly, since it doesn't destroy and also only negates monster effects. A bit annoying from time to time, but it is what it is. So this one can help you if you have if you go into it with one card you summon out of Soma and Soma, then you still have stuff in your graveyard, because it doesn't have to be level 2 crawlers that you summon, it just has to be different names, so you can easily do that. Already talked about this, quite a good card. Cross Sheep, it doesn't really come up overly much, but there is combos and certain ways where you can use this card, and it's not terrible, so I would run it. Lib, very, very important card. Decode Talker, budget hero, power code if you have to beat over certain things and you have plenty of monsters on board. Anyway, Raster Liger, your budget access code talker. Obviously, things like access code or Appaloosa are a little bit better in this specific deck, although this card can help you finish out games and pop some stuff on your opponent's side of the field, so it's not completely terrible. Cards to talk about, Falco can sometimes be helpful because it can special summon one Shaddoll monster from your graveyard bag, which is very, very helpful in certain situations, but I couldn't find a space for it. If you find a space for it, then on you go. We technically could be running this card, but it's so slow, I didn't feel like it was necessary at all. Very, very important, El Shaddoll Shekinaga, obviously, because Earth. It didn't feel like it made much sense in running it and making the deck more expensive than it was just to have this one, because sometimes you then don't have a Shaddoll card in hand, and then this is basically just a massive defense wall. If you already have it, might as well run it over stuff like Wendigo, because technically it synergizes with the whole Crawlers, although they don't get any effect from being sent to the graveyard and do very little in the graveyard, so it's not an amazing synergy. It's just, it's half of an Earth deck, so might as well run the Earth Shaddoll, right? Question mark. It is what it is. And then you can obviously put in some Predaplant, Verte, Anaconda plays, some fusion things, Phoenix Enforcer, all of these kind of things you can include. Technically you can run Prosperity, and even if it's just a 3, this deck wants to take all the, well, consistency it can get, if you can even call it that, and Called by the Grave, because hand traps are, as usual with budget decks, absolutely terrifying and annoying, so run at your own will. Let's go on to the rating section. Alright, let's talk about the strengths of this deck. Let's talk about the power level, and I would give this basically somewhat kind of like the Tintangle variant, a very strong 2. It's bordering to a 3, but I don't feel like you can pull off your stuff consistently enough, and setting 2 cards is just still not good enough. If you're backed up by lots of hand traps, then yes, it would be a bit stronger to be just setting 2, but the thing is, you can't really cram lots of hand traps in this, because then the engine gets watered down a lot and you will be relying on just using hand traps. And I've seen that a lot in the last YCS actually, where game states were a lot of like, oh, I basically do nothing, but I've got a handful of hand traps. It's a way you can play the game, but I wouldn't necessarily say that makes the power level of this specific deck a lot better. So I would say a very strong 2 out of 5, but it just, flip decks just aren't still good enough at all, even though Soma does very much for them, but in the end they're still flip decks, and if you don't have a way of flipping the monsters up, so you need like lots of different components, it's just not good enough. For consistency, I would say like, yeah, it's a 2. It's not even like a strong 2, it is just a 2. Not anything crazy, not anything super great. Yeah, you will be struggling getting into your play starters a lot, but we do run some consistency cards in here, so you will have brick hands. Trust me, you will have brick hands, and it's not overly amazing. When it comes to budget value, I'd say like a solid 3 out of 5. You have lots of cards in here that are good generically. You have Lib, you have Small World, there's lots of stuff you can be doing. Soma is good in lots of decks. The Shaddoll engine isn't terrible in a lot of decks, although it's kind of outdated these days, but it's still fairly playable. You can still build fairly good decks with the whole Shaddoll stuff. It's not absolutely abysmal, so I would say, yeah, definitely a 3 off. It's not crazy, it's still very expensive deck for what it is, so just the value in general to build this specific deck isn't great at all, but the pieces that you get you can easily use in different kind of decks. None of them really like meta defining, although Soma can do stuff in very good decks as well. Talking about you Sprite, yeah, I would say 3 out of 5 is definitely justified. And now let's have a look at some replays. And on we go, the first replay, and you can already see this is a killer hand if your opponent doesn't have any disruptions, and spoilers, they do not in this replay. And I want to showcase how you can go off with this hand, what kind of decisions you kind of will be making along the way, because there are a few, and what this board could look like if you actually manage to get all of your plays through. Afterwards, I'm going to be showing a, well, not different replay, but a replay where like the starting hand is okay, but sometimes you have to adjust your plays according to what you think your opponent is up to as well. So I'll be talking about that in a minute or two, but first of all, let's see what have we got in this hand. We have one Krawler Soma, obviously we want this card in our hand. Every hand without this card is subpar. It's not like terrible, but it's at least double terrible. But we have a Soma here, and technically we would have had another chance of getting to Soma, but we would have to have sacrificed our fusion plays, which are somewhat important in this deck, and you will see why that is. So the second option that we have now is either normal summon Squamata or normal summon Danger Mothman, so we can use Soma's effect. It's quite obvious which one you want to be doing. You want to be normal summoning Squamata, because this card, when you flip it over, at least has a flip effect that your opponent has to somewhat be dealing with. And if they clear this by card effect, then at least it triggers something else, and you get another body on board if you send Wendy, for example, or spell trap card pop from time to time. So this one would be the option to go, which I'm pretty sure I did as well. There we go. And now we want to activate Krawler Soma's effect, flipping this face down and summoning this. I like to summon it in defense position. First of all, Lightning Storm is a thing. Second of all, it's got a higher defense value, so why not? And also, if you want to, if you're maybe thinking about going for the whole World Legacies Mind Meld play, then this is also better, because your opponent can't just run over it and you still have like one monster negate, which hurts at least some decks, and you will be playing this deck not much higher than Platinum 5 or something, so this would be okay, like one monster negate and one flip monster to be dealing for your opponent in case they hit you with like some kind of disruption now, which is very well possible. So I'm gonna summon out 2 Krawlers now that I don't really care about. Those are the ones that it doesn't really matter. Obviously Dendrite does stuff during your opponent's turn in a sense, because you do run this deck with Shaddolls, and Shaddolls actually love being sent to the graveyard, who would have thought? So technically it's not like completely useless, but those are the ones that, it's not like Spine or anything, that I still want in the deck to do further plays later on. What we do with this one, like I already said in the deck profile, this is an easy way into the Shaddoll Construct, not El Shaddoll Construct, Shaddoll Construct, and this is now our gateway to pop off a little bit, because now we can basically do the same combo as with Wendy, just with some further steps, because now Construct will be sending Squamata to the graveyard, and well, not actually extra steps, just a bit different, because now Squamata can send Wendy, and Construct can actually send the trap card to the graveyard, and then you still have the same kind of play that I was talking about in the deck profile. We have Hedgehog. Now we can flip over Hedgehog with using Incarnation and banishing Squamata, because we still have, if we want to go into Winda later on, we still have one dark Shaddoll monster, or we will have one dark monster in the graveyard anyway, even without the Shaddolls later on, you'll see. But just to make sure that we have Shaddoll monsters that we would be able to banish, that we don't really care about, with 2 different attributes in case we want to be going into Apkallone. Mine was already preparing to say that name. So we will be searching Shaddoll Schism to our hand, and now we will be sending Schism to the graveyard to be summoning out this one, and here we can go into our link monster. If you have Apkallone, this would be like a good time to use Apkallone actually, because obviously you'd be making it with 3 materials, which is not terrible. Technically you could even make it with 4. I decided to go for Decode Talker. Might have been a bit of a wrong choice here. Possibly Power Code Talker would have been better. I just thought I could summon it into the zones and then I'd be kind of targeting protected, but then I figured, oh well, kind of want to extend my combos here because I have the opportunity to, because I have Danger Mothman and Might Meld in my hand. So that's when I was like, okay, possibly bit of a misplay on my part here. I could have gone for Power Code Talker because it's not as important, but on the other hand, I didn't want to lose this card either for the crackback because it can be important. So you see, you have to make certain decisions, but this could also get me a Dark Monster into the graveyard, so it wouldn't be too bad. Now using the effect of Construct to actually get Schism back, so we already have the full Schism set up. And now I set World Legacy Survivor because there might be a reason that I want to be activating this turn still, to maybe set up for the next turn, get to the field spell, get into some other kind of stuff in my graveyard. Only problem is we already used all the good Shaddoll monsters effects by being sent to the graveyard, so we possibly would be losing out on some stuff. So I wasn't sure if I was going to activate it, but at least wanted to set it. So that's not the one that's been discarded because I want to be discarding Might Meld. And either way, whatever I discard, I will be discarding Might Meld at last. Obviously, we kind of do want to be hitting Might Meld and not Mothman, but 50-50, you know how it goes. Just Mothman to the graveyard. Now we give our opponent an opportunity to actually recycle some stuff. We send Might Meld to the graveyard. They send, what is this? Could have been a tiny bit problematic here if they actually shuffled back Might Meld. Could have still activated it, but little do they know, we would have possibly had the problem that Lib, we couldn't have used the Lib effect because we don't have a World Legacy card in our graveyard then, but we still had Survivor and we could have used it this turn, so it wouldn't have been a massive issue anyway. Even if they decided to go for the trap, they for some reason want to get rid of all my Shaddoll stuff, even though there's still one in here. They see we have like a Dark Monster and we still have Mothman, so I don't know, possibly would have gone for different stuff if I was them, but in the end it's quite hard to know what to go and what to get rid of. Now using these 2 materials for Lib, because Lib's effect is now live. I assumed at this point they didn't have a hand trap. Would have been unlucky if they do into a hand trap that stopped my place now after I used Mothman. That's why I usually don't want to use the Mothman effect unless I really have to. In this case I kind of did. So we're getting Legacy Pawns to set up place during my opponent's turn. I thought if they hadn't drawn into an Ash, they might have used it there, so I don't want to wait till their turn to see if they draw an Ash Blossom during their draw, so I'd rather want to get the special summon out now and not only during their turn, so that's fine. And then I decided why not use World Legacy and Shadows in case I want to be going into Apkallone, because at one point only have 1 Shaddoll monster in graveyard, so I was hoping to mill another one so I could go into it if Winda isn't the right play here, depending on what you play against, because this could still be everything at this point. So I thought might want to go for Apkallone instead of Winda. Gladly I drew into the field spell because this card can actually be somewhat nice. Not overly crazy, but if they for some reason can run over my Deus X-Krawler by battle, then I can at least get rid of one of their boss monsters, and this draws some attention. It's not like a terrible card. Also boosts the attack points and defense points of my X-Krawler by another 300 if I'm not mistaken, so it's even harder to be getting rid of that one. So if we look at the board, this is actually one of the best boards this deck can produce. We have Lip, which doesn't do much right now, but on the crackback it's a very strong card with the shuffle. We have Deus X-Krawler and it's life because we have 4 legacy pawns, and we have possible Winda / Apkallone, whatever we want to be going for. So this is quite nice, and technically if we're playing against the Darkness deck, we also have a Scent with Shaddoll Schism. Let's see what they're doing. They are summoning Tackle Crusader. At this point, I assume it's Adamancipator, actually. So I thought, if they have one of the Adamancipators in hand, then I want to be getting Winda out now, because I think Winda isn't like Summon Limit where it counts all the summons you've done so far, but I think it only counts the summons while the card is on board. I wasn't 100% sure about this, but that's why I wanted to get Winda out now. So if they special summon one of the tuners from hand, then they can't go into a Synchro monster or activate the effect of the tuner monster. Although there's something interesting about them starting with Tackle Crusader, and you'll be seeing it in a second. You can already think of what I'm talking about. They will have an out to this specific situation, which isn't too hard to figure out if you know the effect of Tackle Crusader. but it will cost them somewhat. So they get out the Adamantipator in case something else happens. Don't know why they do it now, but I guess they do it because they want to get rid of Tackle Crusader. So they go into the battle phase, run into my Winda, and now with the effect of Tackle Crusader, they can actually flip my Winda face down. At this point I was like, okay, I could just flip Winda back up with pawns, but if they have some other ace up their sleeve, I'd rather have my Deus X-Krawler. Plus I thought at this point already, they sacrificed the battle phase, so they can't really be doing all that much. And having Winda face down isn't actually totally bad for me, because then it's turned off for my own turn, and I kind of want to finish this game as quickly as possible. And with this, I do have the opportunity for it. I wasn't sure anymore if the cards that, if this card is flipped face down, that is summoned by Schism, if it then loses the whole thing of it can't be attacking your opponent directly. Wasn't sure of that, didn't want to risk it though, so I wanted to kind of make sure I've had enough damage on board anyway. So I didn't flip this up right away. I wanted to see what they come up to. If they any monster effect on board that special summons, then I was fine. Didn't quite think of that, but in the end it didn't matter all that much. More mills isn't too bad actually, because you'll be seeing mills also help my deck, because we did actually mill one more Shaddoll card, which is Wendi, and Wendi can give us another body on board, which attack stat wise actually quite high, so I was quite happy for them to mill me there. And now they want to go for the actual plays. I could have used this a bit earlier, but in the end they could have still synchro summoned anyway. So what I did now is I decided to not go for Shaddoll Winda, but I decided to go for Deus X-Krawler, because I kind of know Adamantipator, I've kind of played them a while, and without monster effect on board and no battle phase, they don't do all that much, which you'll be seeing now. They're actually going into crazy boss monster, but also that one doesn't get them out of the situation. And with technically them knowing that I've got Lib on board, there's not all that much they can be doing. We also milled a Lost Wind, which we could have used here technically if they didn't shuffle it back. Good on them, but didn't matter all that much. They banished a card but can't activate the effect because of our double floodgate situation. Very nice board actually. We draw into another pawns. Don't really need the pawns. We can discard it by Shaddoll Beast. We could also have discarded like Dragon if they had like a spell trap set, then we would have done that. Right now it didn't really matter too much. Technically could have kept that one and discarded one of the Shaddolls. Wasn't overly fussed about that one. Get our field spell back online because it gives me 300 attack points more, then using the effect of Schism to actually go into Wendigo, a card that you wouldn't think was going to see much play, but we do need, like I said in the deck profile, another link material here to actually go into Reeshaddoll and keep enough damage on board so we can actually finish the game, because we want to link off Lib after we've used the effect, because then we can actually shuffle one card on the field to the deck, one of the best removals possible. So this one, yeah, we set one Might Meld in case we have to negate some monster effect, but then they would be getting rid of Deus X-Krawler, so usually you don't want to use it, but getting it out of the deck is getting it out of the deck, so not bad. Then we go into Reeshaddoll, and since we've already got Decode Talker in our graveyard, we actually, well, obviously we'll spin that card first, and then we can pump up the attack of Reeshaddoll and then push for game, because it would have had 4,300 I think, plus Deus X-Krawler plus Beast, which would have been, well, not well over 8,000, but it would have been over 8,000 even if the Winda thing didn't work. So they knew this and conceded. This is what this deck can do if like everything works perfectly fine. The next bit I will show you, not if not everything works fine, but if you have to for some reason change up your plans a little bit. And here we are back at it again. You can already see the hand isn't terrible either. We could have basically gone through some of the same combos that we did the last turn, but there were two factors that I had, well, I kind of felt a bit iffy about. First of all, they had a trigger that kept coming up, so I thought, if this is something a bit iffy, then I don't want to commit too much and rather go for a play that I know is going to get me into something. And also, they won the die roll but made me go first actually. This is also where I was like, maybe I have certain cards where I don't want to be overextending too much. This is just like a thought experiment by me. Obviously could have gone the exact same combos and had somewhat of the same setup, depending on if, for example, World Legacy Survivor, if that got your Might Melt into the graveyard and so on and so on. There were loads of plays, plus this time we didn't have Squamata, so the place would have looked a tiny bit different on that one. because you couldn't have done the whole Schism stuff. So I thought, why not keep it safe? We have 1 disruptions. If they run into this, we possibly can draw into something else that's going to be helpful. And also the Soma can actually get us into loads of different things. There are 2 options here. Actually just go into Krawler Spine and then get another Krawler face up, so we can go into the Krawler Link monster, or get another Krawler that does some stuff during your opponent's turn that walls up a bit more if your opponent actually gets rid of some of your stuff. I decided to go for that kind of combo. I could have beforehand used my Survivor to see what I actually get, but I wanted to get cards out of my deck that then I don't hit with Survivor, because I wanted to see if I can get the monster negate, for example, or if I could get pawns, or even the field spell was fine. But the more deck thinning, obviously, the better. So this is what I decided. And then I wanted to stop Nibiru, for example, and so on. There's lots of stuff that you kind of want to keep in mind. And I did hit the card that I wanted to be hitting. And another good thing that I didn't mention beforehand is, well, first of all, we'll trigger the Hedgehog effect, get Wendy for next turn. And now a scenario came up that is very, very important. And that is Meld 1 Shaddoll monster and Reeshaddoll Incarnation. Usually you want to use this more with your Shaddoll Winda combo that I've, the fusion monster combo that I've shown a second ago. But this time we can actually use this card's effect during the opponent's turn to flip one of our disruptions. So we have 2 disruptions actually with pawns, which is quite nice. And if the opponent Raigekis the board, we at least can flip over Dendrite or Spine and then float with those 2 into other kind of stuff. And technically, if they Raigeki, then we still have access to Deus X-Krawler, because then we can summon it off of the effects of Spine or Dendrite, whichever we flipped up, and then we still have this card in the graveyard to flip up Deus X-Krawler. So this was also a thing that now worked out. So I feel like sometimes you have to keep these certain plays in your mind that you can be doing. You have to kind of speculate on what you might be hitting with this. It's a luck sack at this point, but it is what it is. So this is not too bad of a starting board, depending what your opponent plays. I mean, obviously this deck isn't like the most competitive, but 4 flip monsters. Could have had needle sealing as well, then this wouldn't have been terrible either. And we're playing against Ancient Warriors, so it made somewhat sense that they made us go second in the end. What I know of playing against Ancient Warriors, once they have the normal summon out and they do not have the continuous spell that searches them stuff or does stuff, they usually somewhat screw, depends on what they have in hand. Obviously, if I have lots of monsters, they have cards that they can special summon, but these kind of cards are usually quite important. Plus this one has an effect that gets more stuff going if you send stuff to the graveyard. So I was like, on summon, do not want them to do that, so I am going to be flipping over my card. I go for the Krawler, because if they have card effects that get rid of stuff, I don't want them to use it on this, or do want them to use it on this, so I can actually float even more and even more. So this is why I flipped this one over and not this one. They actually had to end the turn, possibly drew too many go second cards that don't really work too well against this specific setup, because there's not much you can interact with really. Didn't have the cards to be special summoned out of hand. I did check the deck profile. You'll be seeing something very strange now. They run this one, Thunder of Ruler. The deck profile looked very, very normal, but there were just 2 of this one in here. It is what it is. Sometimes if you're forced to go first, this can be a problem, I guess. It is what it is, but yeah, it did stop me here from finishing the game, and actually did really stop me from setting up certain things, so I was fine. I didn't want to overcommit again, because theoretically I don't know if they play in a go second deck, they can have lots of stuff, so I kind of just wanted to use my stuff to get rid of their things, and at that point send stuff to the graveyard, link off certain things. But if they had Nibiru, I didn't want to be playing into that too much then, since I couldn't attack anyway. There wasn't really much of a need to overextend here, because I know there's some things that can be done, some things that can't be done. Technically could have gone into the Shaddoll Winda here, but I just did decide then in the end I did want to go for the combos. I think I shouldn't be over 4 summons, but I'm not sure if in the end I actually ended up more, and I just thought, well, whatever, I'm going to be fine. But I don't think I would be, because I then sent Beast and was just drawing a card, and then actually, well, it was the field spell, so that worked out. And I think then I just shuffled back my Krawler so I can activate Spine during my opponent's turn, having 2 disruptions again, because we still have the Reeshaddoll card in the graveyard, having 1 protection with Shaddoll Construct, because it's not too easy to get rid of this card. Like, it's still easy, but it's not amazingly easy, because you can't just run it over by battle with a special summon monster. And Then we still have Spine and Squamata, getting rid of 2 monsters from the opponent and a defense wall. So I felt like that was absolutely fine. They get to draw. They normal summon their monster. Well, one of the good ones of the Ancient Warriors. So they did not even have a terrible hand. Don't know what the other ones were, but clearly they didn't help them. Same thing as the last time. I know if they get the effect through, that can be a bit annoying. So might as well not let them already flipping out the Krawler. This time I wouldn't be able to float if they got rid of it, unless they Regeki did. It is what it is. They surrender. This is also how you can be playing the deck. Like, you don't constantly have to be overextending. You don't constantly have to think, oh, fusion plays, link plays, this and that. You can play the deck like a flip deck. Like you see, you have the field spell up. So if they run stuff over by battle, they have to sacrifice their board. You have like quite a big surprise wall that you can block stuff with. You have lots of stuff, and then you have certain things on the crackback. You have World Legacy Survivor still in hand that can still be doing things. So there's different ways if you can play the deck in a more flip-based play style, basically, or more fusion-based play style, depending on what you draw into and depending on what you think you're up against or what you think is the safer option at that point. You don't always want to be overextending into a hand that you don't quite know what it can do. Hope you enjoyed the deck profile. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, but most importantly, I hope you have a nice day.